Attention everybody. 1, 2, 3, attention. This afternoon, our theme is contaminated land and the link with minerals, their connection between nature and industry. And I'd like to introduce you to Fabia Pollard here, who knows more about contaminated land than anybody else in this room.
Is that me? Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks ever so much for inviting me. I'm really, really pleased to be here. I have worked in contaminated land for about 30 years now. And I've lived in Kings Lynn for around 20 years. So I've got real connections with this area. So I'm really pleased to be able to talk to everybody here in such a beautiful setting as well. So you're getting a great view of Kings Lynn. I'm an environmental scientist and a member of the Institute of Environmental Sciences. And I'm also a specialist in geographic information systems and data relating particularly to contaminated land. I was talking to Tim earlier. I described myself as a lapsed geologist. That was where I started. But in contaminated land, you have to be involved in so many different disciplines, like geology, chemistry, toxicology, and then building these mathematical models of environmental systems. So I'm all right at a few different things and pretty good at some others. So I thought it would be quite nice to talk today. And obviously, I do keep banging on. I'm another angry woman who's a trade unionist and very involved in trying to involve people in standing together on issues that are important. So if anyone wants to talk to me about that, I don't particularly have that hat on today. My day job is actually as a regulator. So I'm responsible for looking at particularly the industrial legacy and the agricultural industry as well, and what that's left behind and how that might affect people and how they use land now. So I thought it would be best to illustrate it with a local story. And what you can see here on the map is how Kings Lynn used to look towards the end of the 1800s. And you can see there's industries there on that map. So this is the area just at where the South Gates is now. There's obviously less roads there. Southgate's roundabout isn't there. On the photograph, you can see how it got developed around the 70s. There's things like gasworks, so that produced heat and light. The oil works was a product of that as well, so extracting oils from coal. And then further to the south was the manure works, which was called Morston's Muck Works at some point. So they used to just bring poo in and process it into fertiliser. And that later became Fison's factory. Processing phosphate rocks into phosphate fertilisers. So all those features were there, and as Kings Lynn became developed, they had to build new roads, and they wanted to do new things with the land. But there was this legacy of contaminated land there that had to be dealt with before any development could happen. So these two views are looking at South Lynn. So you can see, if we just go back to the previous slide, the big feature running down the middle of that map is the River Nar, which is a very, very sensitive environment. And so on the first photo on the left. You can again see the Nar with the muckworks against it. And you can also see where people lived. Those houses are still there. You can drive down Wisbeach Road and see those houses. But that was their backdrop, the place where they worked. And people were willing to accept that pollution because it was what provided them with a living. It helped the agriculture locally. So that's the muckworks as a backdrop to the houses. And there was also the sugar plant as well. It was British Sugar's sugar plant further down. The two views below that is what's there now. So you can see distant views of the River Nar. And this has now been cleaned up, so that it's a suitable place for people to live. The first method that was used, actually on the picture on the left, was just to dig and dump. That's the method that was used, which basically means that you dig the problem up and you move it to somewhere else. So all of the difficult material was taken off and put into a landfill. And that's a huge problem with construction now, is that the majority of stuff going into landfill, more than 2/3 of it comes from construction. And this is all material that doesn't need to be thrown away. It could be reused. The picture on the other side is where they've used slightly different methods to remediate the land. So they've looked more at stabilisation so that some of the material can stay there and it's still safe. So this is a slightly more sustainable use of the land. Both of them give you a safe place to live, but they have very different environmental impacts, these different methods. So when the factories closed, this is the types of things that were left, and this is what we found. So you can see when the buildings were being taken down, the land started to return more to the wilderness it would have been and the marshland that would have been there. But there was interesting substances in the ground as well. So the blue material is called blue billy, and that, which is a lovely name for a really horrible substance that's rich in cyanide, and it's just a waste product of the gas production industry. And this obviously has to be dealt with. This is quite difficult to deal with through things like bioremediation, using the bugs in the soil to eat it because it's quite poisonous. The powdery material there as well is phosphogypsum. So this is a byproduct of fertiliser manufacture where you use phosphate rocks, but they are naturally radioactive, so you're actually creating a radioactive waste that has to be dealt with. A large part of my work as well is looking at how people could be harmed by things in the ground. So you can say things like radioactive and cyanide and things like that, and it sounds incredibly dangerous, but my work is in the context of you can have a bottle of poison and it isn't dangerous until you take the lid off and drink it. And that's what I'm looking at, is what is the likelihood that people are going to take the lid off the bottle of poison and drink it. So things like phosphogypsum is perfectly safe as long as you don't disturb it, as long as you don't breathe the dust in. So I'm having to make judgments about what's a sustainable way to deal with these problems. And the other picture is of just sort of general organic material that we often find. And quite often, if it's petroleum hydrocarbons, that sort of thing, the bugs in the soil will eat it. That's what's happened for years. So there's often more organic ways that we can deal with the waste that's in there and make it suitable. But the other type of decisions that we're making is that these housing estates, they satisfy the need. People need places to live, and the government set densities of housing that are acceptable, and that's what planners have to work to. But I'm not sure that they're creating wonderful places to live, or that, you know, that this is always the best approach, to pop houses on them. And there's been a lot more work more recently, and particularly on the back, I don't know if people have heard of all the hoo-ha over biodiversity net gain, which means that if you're going to develop a piece of land and you're going to reduce the biodiversity on that land, you've either got to create an area that increases biodiversity, or you have to offset it with another piece of land that replaces the biodiversity you're losing. And there's a lot of interest now in the contaminated land community about biodiversity net gain and contaminated land. And these studies have been going on for years, but haven't really been talked about. One of the studies that I really like from 2016 looked at land in, it was on the outskirts of London. And the point they made is that a lot of these brownfield sites and contaminated land sites have been left unmanaged, and they are new wildernesses. They're one of the wildest places in our urban landscape. And if only we can preserve our industrial heritage differently, we can maintain these these wonderful spaces, and people can understand where we've come from, and they can feel more part of their environment as well, and preserve that biodiversity. The other thing that I'm very excited about is open mosaic habitats on brownfield sites. And these are a specified biodiversity unit for the purposes of biodiversity net gain, which means that if you were taking a site like the one on the example there, that's offering a rich habitat, it's got hard standing that's suitable for reptiles, it's got seasonal ponds in depressions, but this is just an old bit of factory land. But if you were going to develop a site like this, and you were going to remove that biodiversity, you've got to create it somewhere else. So why not preserve bits of land like this? And I think that's something that I want to push with a lot of the public bodies as well, is that they own loads of really tricky bits of land like this that could become land banks. They could be preserved. If you designate it under this scheme, it has to be preserved for 30 years. So it's saved, at least for that period of time, that you've got to keep it in that state and improve it as well, so improve the biodiversity on there. So there's lots of lovely little parcels of land that really can't be developed, or they're not going to be nice places for houses, for businesses. These could be our little havens of biodiversity in urban landscapes. And this, together with, I was so excited as well to hear Harry talk about soils. There's so much talk now about soil not being, it's a non-renewable resource. It takes millions of years to make good soil. And that's why all this work's going on, saying, can you actually restore it? I mean, I love the fact that in a teaspoon of soil, you've got more life than you do, more bacteria than you have people on the planet in a tiny amount of soil. So that's the direction the contaminated land community are taking, is on sustainable use of soils, on preserving biodiversity. But this is having to happen within the confines of the powerful lobby of the building industry, and whatever the direction of our current government are taking. And that's why I make the point about us being politically engaged as well, because I think we've got a real opportunity at the moment to shape these environmental policies. There's some receptive ears, and there's also a huge amount of scientists as well who are backing this quietly, and forming their own movements as well. So I think that's how I wanted to introduce the topic this afternoon, is that, you know, biodiversity, I think, is the key to these little islands of resilience, hope and recovery in our urban landscapes. Thank you.
Right. I'd like to call upon Katrin to talk to us about chemicals, pollution and contamination, please. Thank you.
Hi there, can you all hear me? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, my name is Katrin Sprunke, and I like to introduce myself first. So I'm German, in case you wonder about my funny accent. I was talking to Tim in our lunch break about how disconnected I actually feel about nature. So I was brought up in a city and moved to London about 12 years ago. So I still live in a city. I really like to live in a city as well. I have got a lot of blood on my hands in regards to where my background is, or where I'm coming from. So I'm originally a trained jeweler. And work, so traditionally we work a lot with precious metals, with silver, with gold, with gemstones. My practice is now in sculpture. I do a little bit of performance as well, sculptural paintings and jewelry, and run also my own jewelry school. And I work a lot with copper. And one of my production methods that I employ is I use electroforming, specifically copper. So here in this picture you can see it's like a copper mine in Zambia. And what I mean by having a lot of blood on my hands is like how things are extracted coming from the ground. I don't know if you've seen Richard Burtynsky's amazing exhibition at the Saatchi Gallery about a year ago, I think it was, where he showed images of different mines around the world. So like really, really shocking how our landscape looks like today. Like zooming into sort of my micro like cosmos and where I work and what my practice is, and also the whole objective of this residency is like I first thought, okay, I want to work with some hazardous waste and find local companies here in King's Lynn and to explore what I can make of their waste products. But then I realized that the time constraints were really like too ambitious to think of other people's waste, and also that I felt maybe I should think about my own waste first. So, yeah, as I mentioned, this production method, electroforming, which is essentially a bit like plating, moving metal through an electrolyte solution, where the electrolyte solution mainly contains water, but then also chemicals, in my case, copper sulfate crystals and sulfuric acid. I worked on a bigger sculpture, like from a jeweler's point of view, bigger, so about life size. Was a steel construction, and I electroformed it like about 90-liter solution I had. And the steel cross-contaminated the chemical balance of this electrolyte and made it completely unusable. And then I looked into getting it professionally, like with a hazardous waste collection, transported back from my studio, but I just couldn't simply afford at the cost of doing that. So I decided then to dry up the solution in the corner of my studio under my bench. And that took about, I think, 3-4 years around until I then recovered the solids, which I was actually planning as well to for like a cheaper quote, to maybe because water was all gone, to just get this hazardous rocks or crystals transported away. But then my assistant was telling me, Katrin, they look so beautiful. Why don't you make art of them? So, and that's what I've brought to King's Lynn. Because, yeah, as I realized, there was too short time of getting in touch with companies. I was trying, but then realized it wasn't easy. What you see here, I forgot to move my my slides. Yeah, so this is basically all what is hanging in the gallery, or hanging and crumbling a bit. So it's the sculptural paintings, I call them. So they are made up with some of the like electroformed copper elements that I've used in the past. Anodes, which is also the copper that you're actually moving, and you can move it to the point where it's almost complete, like depleted. So that we call them anodes, and they are beautifully sort of etched away little copper pieces. I showed you can see maybe in the other slides. Well, pictures are quite small, but you can see them in the gallery as well. So I mixed it with bones. I also looked at chicken bones, like Veronica was mentioning it yesterday, just to sort of like draw a picture of quite dystopian actually. I was very ambitiously thinking of framing them with mirrors or in mirrors because I find mirrors are quite interesting. You can look into it and you can filter out several things and be still blind, sort of. Or you can look at all your little spots and you see suddenly everything. So I've not been there yet. But because of all the framing issues, I will revisit that point. I also used some of the things that I found on the residency on the walk with Tim. So the cast stone, and that's then just the copper crystals glued on, and then again use some of the anodes. There's one more. Yeah, I call them contaminated landscapes in sort of very small format of, they're small sculptures and small paintings. I still have a lot of the waste left in the studio, so it's calling for bigger scale. And also one really beautiful outlook, which excites me a lot, is that I've gone in touch with someone who works in Africa. She supports sort of several schools in Africa, and one of it is like one school is in Zambia. It's a school for jewelry for women who went through like domestic abuse, and they are taught how to make jewelry. And I was initially only sort of proposing how to donate like school tools to her school, but when she visited my studio and saw those paintings, she was asking me, "Oh, we have got someone like a mineral." Gemfield is a company who's mining gemstones in Zambia, and they want to donate gem waste to the school, but they didn't have any tutor who would be able to teach how to draw with gem waste. Well, I haven't done it either, but because I've done now these funny crystal paintings, I would be quite excited to do that, and hopefully funding will come through. Yes, and hopefully take me to the next point as well. There is like a big copper mine. It's like from the first slide. And that's working with those mine tailings is, I think, also quite an exciting outlook. Also working with, Tim brought us to this churchyard where we found copper slug, so there will be plenty of that too from the smelting process. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to do next. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catherine. That was very interesting at the interface between what we want and what we don't want. Right, I will call upon Lizzie to have a speech.
Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Hello, I'm Lizzie. I'm a textile artist and weaver. I'm based in Norwich, and I work mostly with woven textiles and natural dyes and basketry techniques. And there are usually two strands within my work. One looking at using repurposed materials, and the other working from place. I'm always concerned with materials, thinking about their life cycles within my work. And there are a few questions that I ask when I approach, when I think about approaching materials. So I think about how I can keep materials in use. I think about how I can add value to materials. and I think about what will happen to the materials in the work I create at the end of its life cycle. And one of the quotes that's been important to me in my kind of research is from Franklin and Till in their book Radical Matter, and they say, "We are running out of raw materials and creating enormous quantities of waste. We cannot continue to race through our planet's finite resources." So this is, something that I return to very often. So when I'm working with repurposed waste, that's kind of what I'm thinking. We've kind of taken so much, but there is also this really abundant source of waste that we can kind of come back to. So I applied to the residency with the aim of working with repurposed materials, but I've kind of ended up doing both working from place and using repurposed materials. I'm really nervous, so I'm probably shaking a lot and talking quite quickly. Great, okay. As long as you can all hear, that's the main thing. So I was going to talk about one of the pieces of work that I did. In the research week, we had a guided walk around King's Lynn with Ivor. I think it was Ivor. And what was really interesting, apart from seeing all the amazing kind of the architecture and learning about the history, was learning about the movement of materials kind of across the country to King's Lynn, and that stayed with me. And one of the things following the residency, I made a visit to the Lynn Museum. Bumped into James. Keep bumping into Jay. And there had found, and I hadn't been before, but one of the things that I'd come across was the Stonehenge is there, and one of the things I'd found that really kind of, I guess, ignited my curiosity was that the central stump, tree stump, had been dragged into place with honeysuckle rope. And because I use quite a lot of cordage and plant materials in my work, I kind of grabbed onto that idea of that rope, and that sent me along to visit Trews Yard's Fisherfolk Museum, where I bumped into James again. But I also happened across a really, really interesting publication. I did see lots of rope and lots of net, but found this really interesting publication by a local historian, David Andrews, called The Rope Makers and Rope Walks of Lynn. And he had done quite a bit of research and looking at the different rope walks. And so I got myself a map and started walking around King's Lynn to try and find some of these rope walks. Some of them you can still kind of walk now and see now, are easy to find. Some of them are less so. So Friars Walk, it's not far, it's kind of up that side of town. But there's one called Organic Gate. I spent quite a long time trying to find that, or find out where it would have been, because a lot of them have been kind of built over. I wanted to record the rope walks, and I wanted to record them. I was kind of gathering materials from the rope walks, but making cordage as I was walking, so making a string as I was walking. And it did occur to me at the time, kind of, why aren't I making rope? But it takes more than one person to make rope, so I carried on making my string. So I kind of went out, recce'd the different rope walks. I was kind of gathering some materials. I was kind of naturally dyeing with the materials, but went back to the walks and was walking. So I was gathering up as I was walking, adding that to my cordage. Things like, some frayed rope from Friars Walk, and I gathered things like ivy seed heads from the Long Pond rope walk as well. And the rope walks that, I was walking, some of them are kind of really kind of forgotten, overlooked places. So that idea, and again, it probably touches on the walk from this morning, that, when you're walking, some of these places were kind of really, forgotten, overlooked, but quite quiet and peaceful. And, I could see evidence of, everyday life, so the backs of people's houses or people's garages. Some of them were kind of completely built over, so not there anymore. So it was kind of trying to retrace those steps. Some of them, there was evidence of fly tipping and all sorts. So a real contrast with places that had once been, really industrious, really industrial kind of places, with kind of feeding the shipbuilding industry or the fishing industry. I'm going to move on. So the other piece of work that I was working on was a visit to Palm Paper. Was inspired by a visit to Palm Paper, and again, a real contrast with the kind of the quiet of some of the rope walks and that process of kind of quietly making and gathering. I really enjoyed our visit to Palm Paper. It was just nothing you see every day. It's vast, industrial, it's noisy, it smells, it's hot, I've probably said it's noisy, it was really noisy. But I was really, really keen to work with some of the paper from Palm Paper, either the paper they produced or some of the paper that they were kind of collecting in from their waste stream, their waste stocks. But I wasn't able to source any of their paper. They kind of said when I asked that it's becoming increasingly difficult for them to source the waste paper that they're using, and they were reluctant to set precedent by giving any away. So it just kind of made me realise that it's a waste, but there is that perceived value already. They're kind of seeing it's too valuable to start giving it away or to be seen to be giving it away. So I was thinking, but I really want to work with this paper. And when we visited Palm Paper, there were some really, as well as the kind of household waste, paper waste that comes, they get a lot of their waste from kind of newspaper, I guess the trim from newspapers as well. So there were these really beautiful kind of sculptural pieces on the wall that were in the first image. And I tried to get in touch with some kind of newsprint places. I wasn't having any luck until Rachel mentioned Newspaper Club, which is a company based in Glasgow who print small runs of paper and large runs of newspapers for individuals or for print agencies, and they were more than happy to send me some of their offcuts, some of their waste. And when I work with other people's waste, I'm never quite sure what I'm going to get. It's not like I can specify a colour or that it looks a particular way. So they'd send me a couple of boxes. And I waited very excitedly, waiting to see what might turn up. And I got really lucky. So you can see the box on the picture on the left is kind of what happened when I opened the box. So there's this lovely clean white paper, but all of these beautiful colours as well. So I feel like I got really, really lucky with what I had managed to get from the Newspaper Club. So seeing the potential in that material or that someone else's leftovers. And seeing the value that could come from that. So, inspired by the paper trim caught in pipes at Palm Paper, I wanted to make something quite loose and flowing and sculptural. And I used cordage, again, and twining to kind of gather up those materials. And I like the idea that in this piece, those materials are gathered up quite loosely for future use. So I could come along at any time and be taking that paper to make something to use again. The other thing I was going to say about the cordage, so the trim comes from Newspaper Club, but the cordage is made from paper, a newspaper bought on the 1st of August of this year, which happens to be Earth Overshoot Day. So just that idea, and I think Bridget mentioned that this morning, of how we do need to be mindful of what we're using and what the planet can. What we can take and when that will run out. So I guess what I was really hoping to do was highlight the value, the potential in waste materials, but also there's that idea of possibility, which I guess comes, again, back to Bridget's talk this morning about that possibility and seeing those opportunities. And I'm just going to go to my last slide. So again, thinking about that value and that different way of thinking about material. So I hope I've kind of, I guess I'm trying to come with some optimism and maybe some hope. And the other thing, and with the help of Greta, who it just happens to be a pupil at a school near one of the rope warps. I was making cordage and kind of looking around as I was going along and saw this really lovely poster on the outside of Whitefriars Academy, where they must have been doing some kind of looking at environmental issues and what they do with rubbish and waste, and this idea of rude rubbish and how we should be looking after our rubbish. So I thought that was an optimistic note to end on. That's me.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. I think it's Jan's turn to come in.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Jan Micha. I'm from Germany, based in Berlin at the moment, and I have a background in product design and social design. So this profession causes many problems as this part of this growth and profit-oriented economy, which I always try to find my own practice in, which lies it's based on post-consumerism, how to work with material streams, looping straight lines, sufficiency, repair, and teaching about material transformations. Then a few years ago, I came across this huge white mountain that you can see here on train journey, and it's made entirely of table salt. I don't want to depress anyone today even more than we already are focused on these quite difficult topics. So I'm going to talk about the heavy facts in a very quick and painful way. Let's see if that works. So it's called Monte Carli. It's the landfill of the potash production. Potash is used as fertilizer, and 70% of the potash production is this byproduct table salt, which they landfill here. It has a purity of 96%, and of course it's more profitable to mine for new table salt, for other table salt with a 99% purity. So we're talking about 3% difference here. This mountain has been growing only since 1973. It rises up to 220 meters higher than the ground level, which makes up Germany's highest human-made mountain. It grows every day by 20,000 tons, and the production generates additional brine, which is together with the rainwater from this mountain being discharged into a nearby river. Within a 3-kilometer radius, the biodiversity has fallen from about 60 to 100 plants species per square meter to 3 to 6. The underground tunnel network is one of the biggest, or is the biggest in Europe. It covers 600 square kilometers, of course, which is as big as the city of Munich. And in the tunnel network, you can find the biggest underground toxic waste dump, where toxic waste from the EU and the USA are stored since about 20 years. Which are heavy metals, radioactive materials, filter dusts, and so on. And this mountain has about 13 smaller siblings only in Germany. I talk about this mountain a bit more in a short video that you can find on my Instagram, and I also produced a small booklet where you can read a bit more about it if you're really interested in more of these depressing information. So the more I researched, I came closer to this unbelievable consequences that unfolded in front of me. And I couldn't find an angle in my, or a starting point in my own usual practice. But then I came across the groundwork network and the groundwork residency program, and I applied, and well, we can all see what the result of that is. I'm here. Thank you very much. By my theoretical research, I understood that this mineral is kind of ruining huge ecosystem. And during my artistic research, which I started a few weeks before I came to the residency, it turned out that there's a specific beauty to it, and it's a very interesting mineral. It has a lot of potentials, and it's so interconnected. So the first field trips of the residency helped me quite a lot to see this interconnectedness. I have to thank Nick Etchison and Tim, and you, Sarah Hollock, for sharing all your knowledge about reading a landscape, about what geology means, and for all the references. Especially the Norfolk Heritage Explorer is a great thing. I never had access to something like this. So salt has been for centuries a highly valuable material, mostly as valuable as gold. And nowadays it's waste material. And I kind of didn't understand what happened in between, especially because we still extract so much salt because we need it for so many other industrial processes. Basically all materials, everything that we use in our daily lives is somewhere connected to salt. So this sculpture is really based on this case study of the Monte Carli. I called it the ecology of folly because that's what I felt this whole process was. Because it's really the representation of a product, a material in the wrong place. And the salt structure that you can see basically as the top part of the sculpture is representing the hollow space that has been dug from the ground, basically. And it's hovering like a Damocles sword above these plants that you can see underneath it, which are not our crops because they, of course, receive the fertilizers that we produce from this, but they represent biodiversity in these areas, which are basically being kind of destroyed very slowly. For me, there's a certain beauty to this whole aspect because this process cannot be stopped anymore, and it's a specific idea of decay of a landscape that we kind of induced. Then a second part of my work, really exploring the beauty of salt. I cannot tell really why, but I really wanted to melt salt. And all the ceramic people here in the room know how dangerous that can be for your kiln. And but I found Ben Emerson from the Tin Can Pottery, which is nearby here. And he allowed me to use his Araku kiln for 3 firings. And I was very surprised how difficult it was and how aggressive this mineral can be when it's getting to this liquid state. I actually killed all 3 metal molds that I was making for it. They completely corroded, and which you can see partly in the colors in those pieces of salt that I was able to melt. And when salt is exposed to water, it becomes alive, and that is when the beauty is actually happening. On its own, it grows flowers, flower-like shapes. So we also call them flowers, like salt flowers, and they really transform beautifully from within. And in contact with other materials, it starts to dismantle layer by layer. And it's never in a still state anymore once it's in humidity. So all my sculptures has been changing quite a lot since I actually placed them here. So salt is an agent for change, and by efflorescence it destructs even stones or metals, which you can vividly see in the King's Lynn Minster, another of my case studies for my work. If you haven't seen it, it's really worth visiting it. There was just, it's an early medieval salt pan where they built the church on top, and every time there's coming water in, you can see how the salt is basically blooming out of the rocks, out of all the stone. Which means salt is also, for me, equaling entropy. It's really a change agent. It's changing everything from within and from the outside. Well, in the end, salt is, for me, something that's seemingly simple and essential for our life. It shows destruction and beauty. It's a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of all living things and everything that is united by construction and deconstruction. And we can see how our unintended consequences are basically taking place in these environments where we are not mindfully about the extraction. And as we navigate through an era of environmental crisis, I really hope that we can shift from a mindset of endless growth and exploitation to one of sufficiency, of repair and of care. And like with salt, change is inevitable. But it's to us whether it's a corrosive one or one that's transformative. And I will leave you with one of my quite personal questions since a few years, which is how can I transform the waste that I and our ancestors created, whether it's material, cultural, or systemic, into something meaningful? Thank you. I have quite some of these brochures with me, so if someone's interested, just let me know.
Right, next into the trenches is Victoria.
Hello everyone, can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay, that's great. So the research I'm introducing today draws from different yet interconnected sources, and it especially is directed by my own identity as a Yorkshire woman who lives above the extracted coal seams that fueled the Industrial Revolution at a time in which a global climate crisis unfolds. And this research has been sort of developed as part of the Heavy Water exhibition at the Groundwork Gallery, which took place this summer. And Heavy Water is an art collective that responds creatively to traces of history through archives, collections and sites, and includes myself and artists Maud Hayab-Vera and Joanna Whittle. Some of you might have met all three of us during the events that took place during the show. But the broader scope of my coal project incorporates research undertaken at the University of Leeds Special Collections, the National Coal Mining Museum, the Sedgwick Museum in Cambridge, the Delphi Museum in Greece, and Hobberget Cave in Finland. The ecology of mines is recognised as cave fauna by biospeleologists. Mines are effectively artificial cave-like habitats for the organisms that dwell there. Yet mines are forced openings in the earth rather than naturally occurring ones, fissures in the landscape forcefully sunk in order to garner their material wealth. There is something evocative about this violent action, and the capitalist extractive force is fused with a myriad of mythologies in my unfolding land-based research to generate new stories of disturbance, agitation, extraction, and prophecy in relation to the geology beneath my feet. With this research, I was reminded that landscapes are in a constant state of flux. Nothing is static and unchanging. Fossils and minerals found by miners in the coal seams of South Yorkshire, for example, which is the image on the left there, which are held in the Natural History Collection at Museum Sheffield, illustrate geological time transformation as remnants of prehistoric ferns and trees remind us that Sheffield was once a tropical rainforest in the Carboniferous period. William Smith was a geologist and a canal engineer who developed the first ever geological map of Britain in 1815. A copy of his book, Strata Identified by Organised Fossils, from 1816, is housed in the special collections at the University of Leeds, and I was very happy to find an original copy of the 1815 map on display at the Sedgwick Museum in Cambridge. Looking at the map, which for me charts what lies beneath our familiar network of man-made roads and cities, has marked a huge shift in my understanding of landscape. Smith's map symbolises a cultural shift towards perceiving nature as an industrial product to be exploited. Not only is this a stunningly beautiful illustration of the rich and varied geology of Britain, it is also a blueprint that, in part, enabled the language of geology as a science to infiltrate the materiality of the strata beneath our feet, and with it unravel the cultural and folkloric meanings that underpinned a place-based sense of mysticism and belonging across the landscapes of Britain. Untitled Coal is an appropriated version of Smith's map, presenting viewers with a series of delineated absences. Coalfields, which Smith originally highlighted in undulations of grey, have been physically removed, extracted with a scalpel, and replaced by jasmonite laced with coal dust. Through this action, the coal is centralised as my subject, and the reproduction of the map becomes a conduit for the materiality it represents. Exhibited alongside the map is my sculptural installation entitled Portals, made out of the same earthly material that forms the map's infill. Symbolic of the man-made forms found in mine shafts, these delicate, skin-like sculptures are digitised representations of the broken earth made manifest, as digital 3D models of underground systems are translated back into physical objects using fossilised organic matter from prehistory. The material resonance of these works form a physical marker that brings the coalfields of Yorkshire to the fore. These works represent the absences below ground in a way that reveals a myriad of connected material, social, cultural, political, and economic histories. Remythologizing this underground geological landscape has been explored through a sustained and interconnected series of site visits to cave and mine sites across Europe. The Mother Nature trope is prevalent across cultures, and my work seeks to subvert and reclaim selected myths in relation to my embodied encounters with the disused mines of Yorkshire and their legacies. The Corinthian cave, situated close to Delphi in Greece, is famous as a site of the oracle in Greek mythology. The cave was thought to be the meeting place between a group of local women and Gaia, goddess of the earth. These women, known as Pythia, would sit above a chasm in the earth and become intoxicated with vapours that seeped out of the rock before delivering prophecies to their local community. In addition to Delphi, I also visited Finland to locate the Hogberget Cave, known locally as the Womb of the Earth due to its unusual uterus-shaped formation. In my video work entitled Channeling to Dwell Underneath the Ground, the snake, as the established guardian of the mines and as the serpent son of Gaia, is revered through an entangled and materially embedded reinterpretation of the myths, folklore, and post-industrial heritage encountered. In the National Coal Mining Museum collection, there are also a series of evocative coal carvings of women made by coal miner Alan Armstrong, which in the context of this artwork are recontextualized as sacred artifacts or offerings to Gaia, drawing on the female effigies found at Delphi. There is also reference in the works developed to Dorcas, a female spirit who is said to speak to miners deep underground. And interestingly, women were actually seen as a bad omen by superstitious miners once they were excluded from the profession. Thus, the work draws on mythic and cosmological interrelations between sacred sites and sacred bodies via artifacts found in ancient and contemporary cultures and through material encounters with the earth. And I'm hoping that we can share. Press it again? Okay. film is just over 6 minutes, and it will be available online if you wanted to go through my website to see the full thing. Thank you.
Last and not least, we have Rachel.
Hello. Thank you for all still being awake at this late hour of the day. So yeah, I'm Rachel. I'm a photographic artist based in Norwich, and I took part in the groundwork residency this summer. So just a very, very brief little bit of background about my work. Very broadly, it's about connection. Often between things that might at first glance appear to be quite separate or disconnected or even quite polarised. And I'm particularly interested in the power of the arts to shine a light on the interconnection between humans and the ecosystems that we're part of. So, as I'm sure you'll have gathered from other people's presentations, the Residency Research Week was an absolute whirlwind of incredible places and people and knowledge, and I feel like there were so many fascinating threads I could have followed, and rabbit holes I could have quite happily lost myself down for the entire summer. But by the end of the week, my ideas had started to, I'm not going to say crystallise, because that took a lot longer, but they'd started to take shape. And I found myself thinking a lot about the human interaction or interventions in the environments and landscapes that we visited. And I began to envision this as a spectrum, with at one extreme an attitude of control, domination and extractivism, and at the other extreme a very hands-off, let nature take its course, kind of passive sort of attitude. Neither of which I think are particularly helpful, and both of which perpetuate the problematic nature-culture divide that is so prevalent in our society. However, at the midpoint of this spectrum, there can be seen a more reciprocal relationship between humans and the environments they're part of, one leaning more towards stewardship and care. And we were very fortunate to visit some wonderful and extremely varied examples of this on the residency. So 2 of these places lodged themselves firmly in my imagination and became the focus of my creative explorations. And part of my fascination with them stemmed from the way they appeared so wildly different. And at first glance, one could be forgiven for assuming they were actually at opposite extremes of this spectrum. So the first of these, which you'll see on the left of the screen, is the, I think, yes, if I can tell my left from my right at this time of day, is the Palm Paper Mill, which is an industrial colossus just over there on the outskirts of King's Lynn. And as beautifully described by Lizzie, it's a fascinating place. And I also have never been anywhere like it in my life. It's absolutely enormous. It's really hard to describe just how huge this place is. And noisy and hot and full of machinery and technology. And I think if you had entered that space not knowing any more about it, it would be very easy to assume that it was at the end of the spectrum of the kind of control and extractivism. That end of the spectrum. However, Palm Paper is actually one of the biggest paper recycling centres in the world. It recycles hundreds of thousands of tonnes of paper every year, repurposing waste that might otherwise end up in landfill, and meaning fewer trees need to be cut down to fuel our need for paper products. So what appears on the surface to be a very human-centric construction is actually more deeply connected to nature than we might imagine. And the second place that wormed its way into my creative imagination was Wild Ken Hill. And of course we heard from Harry earlier today, so you've all had a nice overview of what Wild Ken Hill is all about. So there's a photo from Wild Ken Hill on the right-hand side of the screen, which obviously looks very, very different to Palm Paper. And again, I think at first glance, while Ken Hill might appear a particular way, certain areas of it, anyway, look really like the kind of the epitome of completely natural, untouched by humans, very sort of wild and beautiful. Parts of the land look like they might have never felt a human footstep. But of course, as we heard from Harry this morning, there is a huge amount of human intervention and interaction with the land here. Nature is being encouraged to grow and thrive. It's being tended and stewarded by people who are carefully working to regenerate the soil and care for the land and its more than human inhabitants. So both of these places really challenge my perceptions of what is human and what is nature, and made me think about our role as humans in the wider ecosystems that we're part of. And I'm not the first person to mention this writer. I think I might be the third or the fourth. But I also take great inspiration from, can you guess who it might be? Robin Wall Kimmerer. So if you haven't read her work, I really, really, really recommend it. It's incredibly inspiring. She writes beautifully about the possibility of a more reciprocal relationship between humans and the natural world. And paraphrasing a quote from her book, Gathering Moss, she describes how in indigenous ways of knowing, it's understood that each living being has a particular role to play. Every being is endowed with certain gifts, which are also responsibilities, a way of caring for each other. This is the web of reciprocity, that which connects us all. So now on to the sort of outcomes of my time on the residency, which is a triptych of digital multiple exposure photographs titled Human/Nature, which are currently on show at Groundwork Gallery, if anybody wants to go and have a look. So through the process of blending together images of these two seemingly polarised environments, Palm Paper and Wild Ken Hill, I found myself considering the potential of a more reciprocal relationship between humans and the natural world. In the images, I was keen that neither layer took dominance, and that the environments interwove and intermingled to the point where it was no longer possible to tell background from foreground, to tell indoors from outdoors, to tell human from nature. Through this work, I hope to challenge the idea that humans are separate from nature and suggest the possibility of a relationship of give as well as take. Reciprocity as a counterpoint to extractivism. A relationship that positions humans as part of their ecosystem, not apart from it, neither dominating controllers nor passive bystanders, but active participants in a web of reciprocity. Thank you.
We've got a ferment, a creative ferment of thoughts, and we've got our panel of respondents, presenters, contestants who are here, and they all want to hear your questions. So, who would like to kick off?
It's to Victoria. Your discussion of kind of female ideology. Sorry, I'm really tired. I wish I hadn't got the microphone. Looking at kind of goddess figurines and that sort of mythology. Idols. It kind of really made me think of how the Grimes-Graves goddess has been kind of almost written out of the academic books due to this kind of suspicion that the Venus figurine that was found down the mines was kind of planted there as a fake to try and support this idea that the mines were Paleolithic rather than Neolithic. So she's been kind of written out of the academic books. A lot of the more recent ones don't include her. They don't have images of her. But then there's this kind of real cultural different audiences kind of see her differently, and it's kind of this idea that who owns the past, whether she is relevant or real, and whether the sort of archaeological community should be kind of disregarding her role in the history of the site. So I'm not sure what the question is. Was there a question?
I'm fascinated.
What do you think?
Yeah. Okay, I don't know about that story, but I could perhaps try and muddle through something. I'm really interested in reclaiming the traces of destruction through storytelling, and I think looking at sort of Greek mythology, for example, and my partner's half Greek, so I go back there quite a lot, and I'm very lucky to be able to kind of indulge in those stories and be in those landscapes. I'm really interested in how they are magical, and they do something to the reader, or the person kind of being told these stories, in that they visualize a landscape differently. And I think, there's many layers of social history around coal mining that is still very politically, what's the word? There's a lot of political tensions still that exist on the surface, and I guess where communities in and amongst the Yorkshire coalfields are kind of still coming to terms with and I was talking about this just now, the lack of investment since all of these industries collapsed, and the fact that they need money pumping into them, and there's a real kind of inequality that still has a huge impact across society, particularly in the areas that I'm kind of working with. So I think bringing in some of that magic and some of that mythology and recontextualizing those absences that are underground that have so much weight as spaces. That coal that was extracted hasn't disappeared. It's the global warming. It's all of those kind of the aftermath of that action that we're now facing through climate change. And so it's kind of reinvigorating stories, mythologies, but also reclaiming them, subverting them. So the woman as a kind of bad omen. How can we change that, and how can we draw on different mythologies like Gaia and Mother Earth, and use those to memorialize these sites of destruction that have caused so much damage. So, yeah.
I'd like to hear more about the gendering aspect of caves in mythology, but in contemporary history, and how you felt as a woman growing up in that area, and how women felt. Did they feel excluded? Was it a very male-dominated culture that created the coal mining industry?
No, because before women were excluded from mining, it was a family thing. Their children and their wives would go down with them, and they would work together as a family to extract coal. And it was only through changes in the law that excluded women and children from the mines that shifted that industry into it being a very male-dominated industry. And so, I have family members who were miners, but a lot of my family worked in the milling industry as well, in the textile industries. And I would say the thing that, in terms of gender and my experiences of being a woman growing up, it's the neoliberal capitalism that has had such a negative impact on my experiences, in that, that kind of individualization and that separation of communities and cultures and And also our identities, in that women growing up in the 90s were told to look a particular way and act a certain way, and, you know, were vilified a lot in the media, and, you know, that has a kind of negative impact. But I think through the work that I'm doing, particularly my PhD research, there is a re-entanglement with place and nature, and as a result, identity, that is really shifting my understanding of my own female subjectivity, and that has sort of happened organically through engaging with the landscape. And yeah.
Sorry, you've just got onto one of my favourite subjects, so I just want to keep going on it for a second. Firstly, just to your goddess point, I had the great honour of going into one of the other pits at Grimes Graves and met the goddess stone, and I don't know if you've met her, because that was quite a profound experience. And I had to ask Will on the time that he was at your gallery about it, because it was a really moving experience when I was down there with her, but then we moved on to flint napping and, you know, other things. And so when I met him back at the gallery, I'd said why she referred to it as the goddess stone, and got a little bit more on that, because you'll find zero record of her anywhere online. And he spoke about her like it was a known thing, that that's who she is and that's what she is down there, and that she has important spiritual significance. But the only thing I ever found was this back and forth, is this genuine, is this not genuine, with the piece that you're referring to. But as a wider point, and to your points to the panel about what is the role of, I mean, when we talk about storytelling, when we talk about a spiritual and a magical connection to the earth, and then we talk about that within a context of being custodians and with climate crisis. What role do you all feel that has in how we relate to and how we look after landscapes?
I think I've learned that it's all about entangling oneself conceptually back into nature. So the fact that it's this culture-nature separation that is the huge problem that we need to break down in our minds, and it goes back to kind of neoliberalism and this kind of nature as resource framework that you know we've all kind of been built into as a society. And it's, I think, if you can break down that through practice and through encounters with the landscape, and I, you know, from everybody who's spoken today, I've seen that happening, and it's really exciting. I think that is the first step in making some sort of impact, some sort of change in the way that we perceive ourselves in the world.
Am I to say something about this as well?
Was it for all of us?
Not individually, if you don't want to.
I feel like you said it so beautifully. I don't know if I've got anything else I could add. Working? Yes. Oh, hello. I think that's like I said in my talk, that I'm really interested in like the power of the arts in breaking down some of those boundaries between what we see as human and what we see as nature. And kind of, I guess, through my work, I'm doing a lot of this interweaving and layering and bringing together these things that perhaps might seem very separate, in the hope that people might see those images and go, oh, that is connected with that. And those dots do line, like, you know, there is a thread that runs through those things. But I think it needs to come from lots of angles. I think the arts have a huge role to play, but I think there's also, it needs to be a multi-pronged approach, really, to help people to feel more connected and to feel like we're like a part of nature, not like it's something over there.
it's probably too late in the day for me to form any more coherent words, but maybe someone else can.
There's another side to it that we've been hearing about, and that's the resourceful use of what is ignored or what might be regarded as waste, or the sort of things you were talking about, Fabia. Rethinking what's terrible and what's retrievable. And there's a big story about that. That we really have to engage with. And, like we were saying, Palm Paper, it finds that there's too little waste left for them, or it's too valuable. And I know Jan-Erik Visser, whose work I showed right in the early days, says waste is the new gold. He really believes that is the real value. And there's been a lot of talk about that. And maybe we could hear more from both of you about that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting hearing people talk about the connections between people and the land as well. And in my work, it's expressed as pollutant linkages or source pathway receptor. So your receptors. It's but so it's expressed in a very different way, and I think that when we're trying to express that in risk assessments, then that definitely others people. It's not placing you in that situation. It's a receptor, a human receptor. And I think that's the strength of bringing art into these debates, because it will make it on a much more human and relatable scale. And I think that's always... That's where it's been really nice to come along to the gallery and hear the artists talk about how they've created their work, because that has helped me understand the thinking behind it and how it's grown organically, and it's definitely helped me to connect. Yeah. So thank you.
There's something also about sharing the thinking processes behind things and not having artists just there. And again, that's something that started the network thinking was, and the residency program was thinking back from what we see in the gallery to think, what the hell do we do with that information? This very beautiful thing with a terrible, terrible story behind it. What do we do with that? And it's a constant question, a constant conversation we have, because we do talk to everybody, nearly everybody who comes in. And that's led to thinking we have to be active locally, we have to get to understand what is under our feet, but together with the people who are also thinking about that, people like Fabia or people like Charlie, or, who think they're from a different discipline, but really they're not. Oh yeah, do you want to? No.
From like a gallery point of view, and what I found really useful today is seeing the faces behind the ideas, in particular faces. I've just been to the Turner Prize in London, and they're doing exactly the same thing, that they have somebody on a video explaining the work. And I'm seeing your work in a whole different way, and I'm just enjoying that so much. And I think somebody walking in off the street would find that as well. There's an actual face there, a real person that with those ideas. And I just want to say I really enjoyed that. But I've also got a question as well. Well, not a question, just a comment. And it's on Rachel's. And, I'm kind of really involved in like the stewardship care, and I've been making art around that. And what's really kind of my question at the moment is the really brutal side of that and how we work with that, because... stewardship involves a lot of killing, basically, and that becomes quite fractious within a community. And once we're going out into the community talking about what we're doing, because before I moved here, there was the whole campaign up in Norfolk about the koipu, which all the arts community got involved in, and we got a similar thing going on with the muntjacs in Bury. And, it's not all, when you're talking about plants, it seems okay. Once you get onto the mammals, it's really not. So I just wondered if anyone had any thoughts on that, because it's not something that's consistent across different, it really changes across different landscapes, what policies are. And I think it's a really hard thing for people to understand. So that was my thought on that.
Festival that I ran at Wild Ken Hill, it was one of the most challenging things she said is in the protection of the curlew and in talking about that conservation, the thing nobody wants to talk about is culling. And, but their biggest threat is through fox and badger and basically nest raiding. So yes, you can put up fences, but you can't put up fences everywhere. And so that it was a really interesting discussion that came out of that because it's a really emotive subject. So if you're doing work to talk about that, it's a hard subject. Yeah, completely. But she was amazing. So if you need anyone to, I'm not good. Mary Colwell.
Okay.
Yeah, she's very special conservationist.
So, if there isn't anything bubbling up from the floor, maybe we could just have a few quiet minutes at your table, and this isn't a big task at all. So the Groundwork Network, this is the first Groundwork Network event officially. Next year, what I'm planning to do is to have periodically online colloquia or talks, conferences about different subjects. And several people have mentioned some already to me. I'd like to know what are the urgent issues you'd like and feel need to be aired that we could air internationally, say, or that people you want to hear from, subjects you want to tackle. So, but Olia is also, I was just telling this group here, and among other things, she's a videographer and an award-winning children's book illustrator and an artist. Yeah. So shall we go round and just hear a few words from each of you as our final roundup? It would be good to hear from the network in the room, from one table to another. And this time I'll start in a sensible place so I don't inadvertently miss people out. So.
Okay, so essentially we've looked at how we could have events that are forms of exchange within the network, but also outward-facing events to share beyond and to make connections beyond the network as well. Looking at a variety of subjects, but things like hearing from different artists about embodied work, looking at socially engaged and participatory practice, whether that involves the creation of something like a toolkit, whether there's professional development events, and looking at groundwork going out into different environments. So whether there's a pop-up groundwork within a local shop or some kind of community space, and seeing as a kind of experiment, if you like, how that differs in terms of the engagement of local communities. The idea of there being artist collaborations and exchanges through online contact between us, but not just artists, but across sector and interdisciplinary exchanges and collaborations as well, including farmers, gardeners, and a wide range of people. Oh, thank you. And tell me if I get this right. The suggestion of a groundwork garden on contaminated land, working with Fabia. And there's some discussion around the sort of description of that or the naming of that relating to the open mosaic habitat, looking at open art habitat and so on. So that's it. But yeah, we're looking at the art.
We've got our eye on the very place, Devil's Alley, next door to here.
We've got a site.
Well, we're working on it. Okay, thank you. So the next question I can see coming up like a great big boulder is who's going to help with all of this? But that is a genuine question because I'd love help with all of this.
Okay. We were kind of discussing people that we'd like to invite as speakers, and also, so there's a list, but there's also the idea that the people shouldn't just be from the same bubble, but they ought to be kind of wider and possibly even from, in inverted commas, opposing bubbles. So we had like politicians, it could be Ed Miliband, but it also could be Trump. or somebody from fossil fuel industries, for instance, so that they can hear our voices, and it can be not a kind of punch up, but a conversation, a la the conversation on Radio 4, where you've got opposing voices. Other suggestions: Aled Jones Global Sustainability Institute. I'm trying to read my thing. Maybe youth group people from Extinction Rebellion, younger voices, activists, Greenpeace, George Monbiot, thinking about the intersection of colonialism and ecology, race and enslavement, Malcolm Ferdinand. Is that paired dialogues online? I don't know, you're right.
Yeah, no, I took part in a different kind of event, where people were paired together and had to come up with a provocation, and that was really productive, and that worked really well as an online thing. So it was just that as a sort of, that as a structure. Yeah, from...
Yeah, they're making the most of being online to, hear from people further afield, I suppose. Although we do still really appreciate having something in person with real people we can chat to in the queue for food, etc.
Yeah. Well, as Henry knows, because he helped me with that, we had a lot of online things lockdown time, and they were great, but we got really sick of it. But we had a fantastic Japan water one, two of them, and they were very rewarding, and we made all immense contacts across and heard all about the tsunami and its after effects, and it was great. So yeah, I think we've had enough time elapsing after that to get back into it. Oh.
Thanks. Building on that exact point, themes from this table's discussion were sustainable international collaboration. And I suppose building on a lot of the things that Groundwork already does very well, around potentially formalising some sort of themed working groups in potentially a more sort of online enabled framework, where artists can be teamed up with ecologists and scientists and so on, as Groundwork already does, but on themes, and it can be opt-in, opt-out based on interest, and the groups can be fairly autonomous, but that sort of gives a potential direction for structuring collaboration within the network and expanding it internationally and into different themes. There was some interest in documenting and sharing the Groundwork network's findings, and just sort of, I suppose, just interest and curiosity in how you see that happening. And then a workshop idea on somatics and the sort of practice of movement, and it would be great to have a do you want to talk about your sort of vision for how that workshop might look?
Only that, just touching on the embodied practices and artists working with somatics and ecosomatics. So just adding that in. Yeah, I know it's already here in many forms, but make it, yeah.
Yeah, right. That was it.
Thank you very much. I think we're wound round. Oh, no.
We had a couple of themes. One was inspired by Nicola's provocation. She used 3 words about the power, what her medium can do. She said it can educate, it can entertain, and it can empower. We talk a lot, I think, or in some respects, we've talked a lot about the power of art to inform and inspire. We've also talked a lot about activism. But activists need to be activated, and that's about empowerment. So we were quite interested in the role of art, not just in inspiring, but in empowering. The second thing was about deepening roots, forging richer connections with others in our broader community, in those that that people interact with through exhibitions and shows and practice, those we share our landscapes and towns with.
Very good, thank you. So, further networks, deeper.
We've got a lot of scribbling here. I'll try and make some sense of it. I think they kind of divide into workshops which are, as you were saying over there, professional development. Quite a lot of looking at how do we highlight our experience from the work, from all the feedback from the artists was there's something about that very close attention to something, the delving into the detail and the quotation marks childlike quality. I feel like it's actually something to do with this giving ourselves the time to stop and look and truly experience that children do because they see something for the first time, and allow a professional development thing which helps us share our different practices, what helps us get back into that first time state of seeing and experiencing, so we're really in the now, in the present moment. So there were different ways that we described that. And then there were some things which were more outreach, like a home educator's guide and support, and something to do with looking at human nature entanglement and different ways to kind of encourage that for other people. And then some exchange things, so more in-depth stuff on rewilding, more in-depth stuff hearing from people. We put on the front face, the cold face of extraction and pollution management and so on. So we really hear from, it's not the other side, but the people dealing with the other side, so that there can be, I think on the other table you talked about genuine dialogue. Have I missed anything out that we mentioned? I think that covers most of, we had lots and lots written here, but I think that sums it up.
Yeah, we had a really interesting kind of roundup discussion, and we talked about programming and events, and thought that online events were really interesting and they have a place, and in terms of widening the community that can be involved, but that we have all really, really enjoyed being in a space, physically holding space together. So actually to make sure that both of those continue within the programming. Within the gallery, that putting together some video orientation in the way that we've had the great privilege of hearing from everybody individually today about their work, that as you come into the gallery environment, there's an opportunity to engage in that way, but that it is accessible, because a lot of us today, we've over the last 2 days used some incredible language, but that may not be accessible to everybody. There might be an opportunity to do some workshops where people get to interact with some of the materials that you're working with, because through that material interaction that might expand people's understanding of the work you're producing, but also their relationship with the natural world. And just to your comment about childlike states, bringing people into flow state, and we know what a benefit that has for all of our mental health, and that's what a lot of us are doing as artists, but to broaden that to as many people as possible. We talked about an artist trade union and ideas that we might be able to talk to you about broadening something on that basis. I have no idea quite how an artist trade union will work, but... Oh, well, there you go. And then there was one word that I wrote in capitals, which was money. Which, we haven't all talked about very much, but actually sometimes does underpin whether or not we're able to do these amazing things and make them accessible. So.
surprised that that was only mentioned at the very last minute.
All right, we were discussing mainly, no, it's 3 topics, but one took a bit longer. So the very first one that came up is bringing in more indigenous thoughts and ideas, inspiration for what we can learn from that, and then also learning from the global south, from other ideas of cultural backgrounds and that. And then the second would be the idea was again this thought of waste and what waste actually is. So the idea of redistributing these materials that we consider waste, in the sense of the one's trash is the other's treasure. Artistic positions in that of how this redistribution can look like and what the role of the creative industry can be, or creatives can be, to show the companies or people that are working with this matter what other approaches can be. And by that also resource efficiency, we were talking about from photography materials of what are the residues, the leftovers that we have in our practices, and how can they be then redistributed into other fields of either artistic approaches or also other industries. So in the sense also of the blue economy, if you know of that. So it's a circular economy concept. And the last one is? A youth network.
Yeah, I just from something I heard over here, just thought maybe a groundwork youth network, so there might be a reduced network rate for students, younger people to draw them in.
I'd say that's not a good idea.
Ah.
You're probably the youngest person in the room. I thought I'd speak for us all. We need less separation, so we need to be involved in the same conversation as everybody else. Yeah. It does. It applies to everybody, and I think, yes, it's amazing to have spaces where people of some particular sector or minority or who identify in some particular way can share their shared experience and exist in that space, and that's important. But I think we probably create those ourselves personally. We create our own safety bubbles, and on a this network, this topic that we're all connected to, no matter our age or race or anything. It's the world we're living in. It's what we are. It's our matter, and I think the conversation needs to involve all ages. And I think any kind of separation now is in opposition to our goal.
Thank you, Rosie. That's so. I really do believe in eye-level conversation, and I've done a lot of work in the past with children, and I wrote a book called based on a project I ran called Culture of the Countryside, and the last chapter was about a children's project where the children, I ended up saying that we should hand over running of the world to these children. 8 to 10-year-olds were so full of ideas, so unrestrained, so just let's go for it. So I think ghettoizing at any level is really unhelpful, because you never know who you're listening to and who's going to come up with the best idea. You've just got to be open to that. So I really firmly, and that's really underpinning the network very firmly, is it is open. And I've been through 1 or 2 hiccups in thinking that, which I won't go into, but actually it's proved that it has to be open. And thank you all. So you're going to be doing a design innovation hub over here, creating all kinds of things from leftover materials. We've got the videographing little table here. We've got workshops over here. Indigenous cultures, I know where I can go to get information or contacts there. Networks, Jack, you're going to help me, and Rosie, you're going to help me with wider networks. And you're going to help me, Charlie, with local villages. Garden. The garden, Fabia, we're going to work on that. And the list of people and speakers, John, and you can help me with that, Liz. Anyway, there you go. Everyone's got a list of things to do. We're not going to talk about money. It's all, we'll find the money.
Maybe it could be a kind of sliding thing that this is the amount, but if you feel you can pay forward.
Yes, I think something like your paying forward scheme.
There will be some people in here who it will be possible to pay forward regularly, whereas there's other people in here who would really benefit from either a very reduced rate or a smaller rate.
Yeah.
And maybe that could be possible to do.
Yeah.
Or paying for a garden.
Or paying, bartering. I mean, really, if I could undermine the capitalist system in the art world and we just exchange stuff, I would really love to do that.
Take down capitalism.
Yeah.
So maybe people could come and do, a day in the gallery for you, or 2 days.
Yeah. Well, I'd love all that, because it sometimes becomes overwhelming. Anyway, it's always a joy, and fantastic to meet you all and see you all. The gallery's open till 6 for a drink, so you didn't drain it dry last night, so there's enough. There's enough to drink, and it'd be lovely to see you all over there. Catherine's there.
I think I just want to tell you. Sam and I, last time we went to Veronica's to thank her, we decided that we should actually clone her. So, several times.